Welcome to the Education Standards Board webinar on Quality Area 1 Educational Program and Practice for Out of School Hours Care. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today, the Kaurna people, and pay our respects to elders past and present. My name is Janet Callis and I'm a Senior Authorised Officer and Team Leader. I've been working at the Education Standards Board for 7 years. My background's in long day care, OSH, and I've spent some time supervising students doing their placements out in the sector while they've been studying at TAFE. A large component of my work is assessing and rating services against the National Quality Standard, as well as providing support for services on their journey of continuous improvement. Today we'll be speaking with 3 practitioners from the OSH sector, and they'll give us an insight into the challenges they face, the successes they've had, and how they implement the National Quality Standards in their everyday practice. We'll take a different approach to this webinar today due to social distancing and only have 3 people on the screen at one time. Quality Area 1 of the National Quality Standard focuses on ensuring that the educational program and practice of educators is child-centred, stimulating and maximises opportunities for learning and extending each child's development. In all settings, including OSH, the approved provider, nominated supervisor and educational leader are responsible for ensuring that the program for all children is based on the approved learning framework. The national approved framework for school-aged children is My Time, Our Place. For services enrolling children who are preschool age, they should consider the Early Years Learning Framework when planning their program. Regulation 73 outlines that the educational program is to contribute to the learning outcomes for each child. In OSH services, the educational program should reflect an understanding of middle childhood and support learning through play and leisure when educators act intentionally to nurture the development of life skills. Quality Area 1 has 3 standards. 1.1 focuses on the educational program. Standard 1.2 focuses on practice and Standard 1.3 focuses on assessment and planning. We know that Quality Area 1 could be a challenge for OSH services for a number of reasons, and these include the transient nature of staff and the differences in qualification requirements for OSH, sporadic nature of attendance for some children, and a focus on recreational leisure experiences. This webinar will be relevant to approved providers and educators providing care for before school care, after school care and vacation care.
My name's Adam Moller. I'm the Director of Concordia College OSH. I've been in that position for about 7 years now. My OSH experience spans over about 13 years, and prior to that I was a physical education teacher in a primary school. Concordia OSH is licensed for 90 students, which we reach capacity most vacation care days. Before school care is around about 45 and after school care average is about 75.
My name's Emma Wordsworth and I'm the Educational Leader at Settlers Farm Campus OSH. I've been at Settlers Farm OSH for around 10 years, but only in my Educational Leader position for about 5. Jan Hutchison is the Director there and she's been there I think more than 15 years as the Director. We are licensed for 120. We're averaging about 50 to 60 in the morning, 80 to 90 in the afternoon and about that 80 in vacation care too.
My name is Mandy Richardson. I'm the Director of St Pius X OSH, which is an OSH service in Windsor Gardens. I've been there for nearly 30 years as the Director. It started off with about 6 kids we had and just after school care, and it sort of kept growing and building. I kept thinking, oh, it's growing, I might just stay a little bit longer and see this through. I was currently studying another degree, finished the degree, stayed on. Anyway, while I've been there, I've also done a variety of other things. I've worked in the Education Department as Project Officer in the OSH unit. I've also was a moderator under the old Quality Assurance System, NCAC. I've done a Masters in Research looking at developing children's social and emotional intelligence through OSH services. And I've also been the Chair of the OSH Association in South Australia for a number of years and a member of NOSHA, which is the national peak body for outside school hours care.
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of challenges that arise in the uniqueness of an OSH service. I think you identified those earlier, Janet, when you talked about the transient nature of OSH services. We do have an ever-changing staff group. We also have ever-changing children and children that are more permanent than other children. So that raises a lot of issues. You also touched on the fact that we always go between being an educational institution or a care facility, and I think the changes around that vernacular and that wording also present some challenges.
Yes, and the fact I think that we have a unique position as the children are going off to school in the middle of the day, and the other services don't have to deal with that as much as what we do. So it is more of a leisure-based system, and as you said, having that constant change of different children that might only be there for a short time, or they might be there every day, all day. So you have to apply a very different approach to the different children.
Yeah, you do. And the reality of the education and care facility and that dynamic is that at Concordia we see every opportunity is a learning opportunity. So irrespective if they're in school or in OSH, we still think OSH presents some fantastic opportunities with play and growth and development. So we try to structure a lot of our learning and a lot of our curriculum around that incidental sort of learning that might occur at an OSH service.
I don't have anything extra to add. I can only reiterate what these guys say in terms of the staff turnover is a huge issue for us. We have a leadership team of 4 people who have, all been there over 7 years. But other than that, we a majority uni students who come in and out once their course is finished. So,
Yeah, so you set up systems, put them in place, and then you find having to reteach them every year or two. That's a huge challenge for everyone, I know. You set something up, it's working well, then the next year you're dealing with a whole different group of educators, and you basically got to start again. And systems change with different people too, so that's one of the issues, is constantly reflecting and thinking, what are we doing now? Maybe it needs to change because it's not as suitable to this group of children or to this group of educators. We might need to change things up. So I think that's part of our job, is constantly reflecting, looking at what the issues are, the changing nature of everything, and adapting to it.
Yeah, we have what we would classify as an emergent curriculum at Concordia OSH. We're not an OSH service that necessarily plans set activities moving forward week to week. We like to let the curriculum emerge and let the opportunities for children's learning emerge. And we think putting time into our staff and upskilling our staff and giving them opportunities to become aware of that provides the best opportunity for kids to develop in our OSH sector. Having said that, we also have an underlying curriculum that we call the 4Rs, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier when I talked about sort of having some guiding principles at your service. We have what we call the 4Rs, and they stand for relationships, responsibility, risk-taking and respect. And we think if we provide that emerging curriculum with a set routine, with the underlying principles and values, that's the best structure for our OSH day.
So for us, Area 1 is a lot about building relationships, and it's also about the environment, and it's also about routines, not just, so for us the program's all of those things, not just a schedule of activities. So we put a lot of energy into routines, relationships and the environment, and we really believe in that environment as a third teacher, and we put a lot of effort and work into setting up the environment so that children are going to have success, and so that the educators are going to have success in that environment too. And that's how we can address a lot of those children that do come in and they might only be in there for a short period of time, not very often. They know that they can come in and they can feel comfortable. There's different areas set up for different activities. It's not just this one big group that's loud. They can go into a small area with their friend. And because we have a focus on relationships too, it's really important when children come in, we always want to make sure that they've got a relationship or a friend there that they can work with, and building relationships with educators. So it's really important that we know that they can talk to other people in the service and also talk to the educators. So.
I think another thing, Janet, that we really try to focus on at Concordia is to have a good balance between educator-led activities and child-led activities. And I'll reiterate what Mandy said about the environment. For us, it's really important to have an autonomous environment where children can move between activities and they really lead their own learning and lead their own activities and what they want to do, because children's interests can change fairly quickly. They might come over and want to do some physical activity, they might change to construction, and then they might get tired and want to do some art and craft and sit down. So I think, like Mandy said, your environment has to be structured in a way that really captures all those different interests that kids might bring day to day.
Sure. So you're saying you have a whole range of resources and materials, available at all times and various areas for children to access.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think when people think about programming, and one of the biggest issues for services, I think, is how to put information back into the learning cycle, and it doesn't just need to be into that schedule of activities. It can be also looking at your routines and environment that isn't working. So for example, we used to have a child on the spectrum who enjoyed playing with the car set, and the car set was set near the door to go outside in the afternoons, and he would get very anxious playing in that area when the children started milling about that door. So for us it was about, well, we need to move that and we consider that part of the program, looking and putting that back into the cycle. We've rearranged our environment to have a better outcome for that child and also the other children there. So it's looking at the program in a more holistic fashion.
We identified that as a real challenge for OSH earlier, is that there's the transient nature of the staff, but also the transient nature of the children attending. And it's really difficult with those children that are only coming, sort of one day a week for half an hour in before school care, or perhaps just come in vacation care. The reality of it, Jenna, I think, is that those students aren't going to have a huge influence on your future practice, but they have to be incorporated to ensure that they feel a sense of belonging in your practice. So it's the fine line between, we don't have to do a lot of heavy documentation on them and keep them, but we have to ensure that they feel safe, but valued and have a sense of belonging. So for us, we ensure that their names on our star chart board, which I mentioned before is the 4Rs, a big part of our curriculum. So we ensure that their name's on there. So when they walk in, they see their name, they know they're part of the service. But I think those kids, those children that aren't coming very often, the key with those children is to really understand their family, understand their background, their friendship groups, what's happening in their classroom. So when they do come, it might only be once or twice, but you still know that you can incorporate them into your system because you do know a lot about their background and where they come from. And that can be done at the enrolment process. It can be done, through an induction day with their family or a tour. So there are a number of different ways you do it, rather than having to have huge amounts of documentation for kids that only come once or twice.
Yeah, so we have a few systems because we find that's one of the most challenging things, is getting that information, putting it back into the program, the system. And for us, it works best having a person that can take all of the information that we've gathered along and facilitating putting it back in there. So we gather information in a range of ways, from observing children in their play, observing in the activities they're doing, also writing a few stories using online software. We gather information along the way, and then we capture all of that information and put it back into our program. So one of the things we have is we have a lot of educators, and one of the things we try and do is to capture their thoughts, because you do have a lot of these thoughts when you're working with the children, or we've actually taught and encouraged our educators to have that critical thought when they're working with, what is it about what that child's doing that's made you think, wow, that's really cool. So what we've encouraged them to do is to capture those thoughts, at least if you can do one every night on a sticky note, which goes in a book. And it could be about, it's not working, the cars aren't working, it gets written on a sticky note, and then at a staff meeting we can have a conversation about that at a staff meeting and brainstorm how we might change that, or it might be a simple thing of, we haven't got enough cars, let's purchase some more. So we just encourage, and it's a good way to get everyone involved into thinking, but you do need to teach them how to do that reflective thought along the way. It doesn't just happen, you've got to sort of mentor them a bit to have these thoughts and then feed it back where it can, and keeping in mind that it's not just about scheduled activities, but also the environment and the routine about anything that is working or not working.
Do you have opportunities for children to jot down their ideas or their thoughts of what they would like to do?
Yeah, we do. We, a couple of years ago, actually painted one of our walls with whiteboard paint, which we call an imagination wall. And that gives children an opportunity to feed back into the program their thoughts about a range of different things. So we actually allow our children to have say on the staff we hire. We allow children to have input into the menu, of course, they choose each week. The program and practice, but more importantly into the environment as well. So if there's some slight changes or altercations that children may have, or suggestions where they might think, we could use this area for something different, we allow them to write that on the imagination wall, and as Mandy mentioned, that's our way of feeding that back into the program cycle.
We have a number of different ways which change over time. Things evolve and change. The thing that's working at the minute, I'm not really sure what kick-started it, but they've started putting all these suggestions in the suggestion box. We kind of renovated a box, and I don't know, but now and some of them are very creative and entertaining. So we do like to let children know what we value their input. So we type up all the questions, and I think this is where the interest is coming from too. We type up their questions, put their name to it, and put our response there each month, so they can see what the latest suggestions are and responses. And I think people go, well, I want to get in on this, so they're feeding in that way. So that's working really well. But I also think that we have set up a culture within our service where the children feel comfortable just mentioning things all the time, and it's sort of conversational, like, we're doing this, what should we do? We're having a snack next week, and they will voice all the time. Once again, if a child in a conversation is voicing about something that they think, is good, which comes up all the time, it's once again teaching the educators, capture that, put it on a sticky note before the thought is lost, because so often thoughts are lost, and then we don't go back to them. So that's why I sort of say, can you write it down, just stick it in that book that we can look at later. So I think that's a good part of critical reflection, is capturing those thoughts.
And I think that incidental stuff should form a huge part of your documentation. I've spoken many times before about the fact that at Concordia Roche we don't do observations, and I don't encourage my staff to sort of stand there and do individual observations. Having said that, those incidental captures or observations, I think you have to provide a platform for staff to capture them. So we do have a large sort of A3 book that we call an observational book, and we capture those incidental moments and then reflect back on them at staff meeting, like Mandy mentioned.
Building upon your extensive knowledge of each child, like we said before.
Absolutely, yeah.
So our first assessment and rating visit, we were using portfolios. So each child, so that's the 250 children that are enrolled with us, had their own paper folder where we put stuff in and stored them in a filing cabinet. And it wasn't really working. It wasn't effective. And when the assessor came out and discussed that with us, we realised we needed to make some changes and we weren't quite doing what we needed to be doing. So we sat down as a team, we had leadership meetings, we had staff meetings. The main feedback that we got is we weren't really having a cycle. We had lots of observations that weren't going anywhere. So our main journey was to get everything that we were doing on the right cycle and get everything on track, I guess.
I would imagine it would be quite difficult to capture documentation on so many children at your service.
Yeah.
And you have set yourself up with portfolios for each child.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was quite difficult.
So what have you been doing?
So we're now using One Child, which is a software system, and it's been a bit of a lifesaver for us in terms of it's a bit of a template, so we are, I guess, a bit old school in our ways in terms of observations and learning stories and stuff like that, but that's what's working for us at the moment. One Child has a story count sector within it, so before educators go out and are taking observations, they can check One Child and it can say this particular child doesn't have any observations, or this person has X amount. So it gives you an indication of what you could be looking for. But we also, like Mandy, have an area where educators can write down those little things that we want to reflect on later or we want to hear.
So your educators are way more intentional in planning those extension opportunities or those follow-up activities?
Absolutely, yeah. So with One Child, we've got a bit of a thread of planning, so they'll take the observation, they'll go back and analyse it, then they'll plan an activity from that. So that's where we capture the abilities or the interests of those particular children. But like Adam said as well, we have multiple areas open each afternoon. We are well staffed. So for our kinder children, we have a 1:5 ratio. We also have inclusion support funding for 7 children. So our ratio is quite low. We generally are running at a 1:10. We can have lots of different play spaces open. We also have play spaces that are a senior room, which is 9+ and an 8 and under room. So it gives children that sense of belonging, that they can participate in activities that are a little bit more age appropriate for them. But yeah, like Mandy said, we have those, the little book that children can contribute to. We have a suggestion box as well, where, PlayStation games they might want or new apps they want on the iPads. So giving them that control over what happens or what they're playing or where they're playing.
So when looking at our method for documentation, it's sort of evolved over time and it keeps evolving. And as I said, different people come in, we change things up. But we had a system before that involved one of the educators typing up all of our sticky notes and our thoughts, and also when we've done some learning stories, some outcomes from there, putting it back into the program. It was quite, and we could keep track, because one of the things you have to do is say for every child how you're managing that documentation. We thought, well, if we've got this big spreadsheet, it's got all these names on there, and that was working well for us. But it was quite time consuming, which I've got 2 thoughts on that, because I also think that at the same time we're trying to advocate for more professionalism in OSH and for more hours so that people can work closer to full time. So it was actually giving people work, and I'm not against that. I think now one of the key things to improving OSH is to giving people more non-contact time, not just expecting that OSH all gets done in contact time. So I think that OSH services can up the amount of non-contact time and documentation they're doing. However, I do think that relationships is the most important thing. So if your documentation is taking away from building relationships or maintaining relationships with children or educators or families, then you should stop that system and choose something else. So I'm very much for doing it as long as it's building on relationships. The other thing that I think is really important is going out and having a look what other services are doing. And sometime last year I went to Emma's service and saw what they were doing there, and I thought, wow, this One Child program's working really well. I'd looked at other online software programs and didn't really like it. But the thing about the One Child was it keeps that story count, so we didn't need someone just manually keeping a count, it was automatically doing it. And it was quite cost effective, and it was a very simple template. The other thing it did was it took away from just a few people doing the stories, which was happening before. This is very manageable for all of the educators, and we quickly...
And it does give you a snapshot as well of which educators are posting stories and stuff like that as well, so you can see, if that load is being shared, I guess.
Yeah, so you can keep an eye on who's writing the stories. You can see which families are reading them. They can comment on there. So it's got the whole package, and it has worked very well for us. So I want to say thanks, Emma. But also it's a good lesson. Go out and see what other people are doing. So so that's how we're sort of managing our documentation at the minute.
Yeah, we are, thanks to One Child, are very similar to Mandy and her way of documenting. So like she said, we're using that, and it's giving us more of a cycle. Like I said before, it shows the thread of an observation and then an activity that's been planned from that, and then there's also a space in there for reflection. So the staff member can write up a reflection, but that doesn't go to the parent. So that part's just viewing for us or for them. So One Child is great.
Yeah, for me, I think it's important for services to realise that there's not one right way to document children's learning. We actually wrote up a documentation policy, and for us that was important because we realised that documentation really needs to be done to influence future learning and guide future practice, rather than documentation for the sake of just putting things in there for assessors to see.
Yeah, which is what I was saying in my previous thing, that our journey was we were just writing up these documentations or observations because we felt like that's what we were supposed to be doing, but they weren't going anywhere. They were just this pile of observations that was building up.
And we've certainly tried things and found things that haven't worked so well, but part of that critical reflection process, if it's embedded into your culture, is you can quickly identify things that aren't working and then change them and adapt them to make sure you've got things that are.
Reflective practice is a form of ongoing learning, engaging with questions and philosophy and ethics and practice. It's more than evaluation and involves examining aspects from different perspectives. Now we'll hear from Mandy, Adam and Emma about their approach to critical reflection and how they ensure it drives their program.
Yeah, so reflective practice is a key component of any OSH service. For me, it starts with a statement of philosophy and a documentation policy. I think reflective practice without having those documents to reflect back on can be a little bit frivolous at times, and we allow that statement of philosophy and the documentation policy to enable us to keep us on track and enable us to really find out what works well and what's not working well, and then adapt it if we need to adapt it. So I would say the first key component of reflecting on any practice is have a really firm statement of philosophy that will guide your practice, and then everything you do after that can always come back to your statement of philosophy.
For me, the critical reflection is looking outside and then looking back in. So I am a big advocate for going out and looking at other services, other OSH services. Maybe you might want to look at preschools, or you might want to read about what they're doing, because I think that combined with your philosophy, you reflect back on your service and think, well, why don't we do that here? Why do we do it this way? And think about, justify why it is that you're doing the practices that you're doing. I think we need to expose ourselves to new experiences, reflect that back on, well, this is what we believe in our philosophy. Why are we doing that? Maybe we should be doing something different.
Yeah, and I think, I think conversations with assessors, if you're brave enough to have them, will lead you to this point, which is just saying we're doing it because that's how we've always done it isn't good enough anymore. No. You've got to be able to justify why you're doing it and have either some research or some evidence behind why you're making the decisions you're making.
Yeah, for us as well, we find it's really important that, and our staff meetings are the best time for that, that is everybody's involved in that critical reflection. We have our leadership team, which is there's 4 of us, but it's not just us, all those educators are involved in everything that happens day to day. So for us, I guess an example was we did go and visit another service. We used to do our afternoon tea, which is, I guess, main meal, at at 4:30 and fruit when the kids arrived at 3:30. We went to another service who done it the other way around. So it was about us coming back and saying, actually, the kids are way hungrier at 3 o'clock when they arrive. Why are we, it's just, yeah. So seeing what other people are doing, coming back and going, actually, we could be doing it like this.
But that's the cycle of ongoing improvement they want to see as well, is that you've got to practice, you've gone out there, you've extended your knowledge, I guess you've looked beyond the end of your nose and you've gone to another service, you've seen something that's different, you've taken it back to your staff, you've reflected upon it and you've changed it. That in a sense is the ongoing cycle of improvement, isn't it?
The other important thing is professional reading, and if you're not getting out to other services, by doing some professional reading you can reflect back on your service, learn about new practice. Under this new system, there's not a checklist of things you have to be doing, so it's up to every individual service or the educators there to go off and find out what is best practice and bring that back to your service. You're not going to be spoon-fed what's happening. It's up to services to go and find out what is happening out there, read the professional reading and apply it back to your service context.
Yeah, we also encourage our children to critically reflect on their behaviour as well. So when there's been an incident or something like that, we use those restorative practices. So what were you thinking at the time? What could you do next time? Who was affected by that behaviour? And getting them to think about getting that frame of mind as well.
And that's part of that children's agency we mentioned before. If it's all well and good to say you promote children's agency and you're capturing individual learning, but unless you're actually doing it in your practice, and that's one of those ways, is you don't want to be solving all the issues for children. If kids come up and they say they're bored, you don't want to be saying, okay, go and do this activity. You want to give them the opportunity to find those things out for themselves.
So guys, how do you, with such a diverse group of educators, how do you bring everyone in and teach them about critical reflection and what it involves?
I guess for us, I was talking about staff meetings before, are our best time to do that. Everyone's there together, but it's like this. It's more of a conversation base. You're just talking about what we are doing or what we could be doing. It's not overthinking critical reflection. It's kind of just bringing it back to the basics of talking about what we do and how we can do it better.
Yeah, I think one of the most simple but most effective practices is just having a look at your statement of philosophy. Why do we do what we do and what's guiding that statement of philosophy? Like you mentioned, Mandy, professional reading. What research or evidence supports why you're behaving the way you're behaving? I think all those questions are really important, and I agree with Emma. They're not necessarily done always formally in a staff meeting. While staff meeting time is vitally important, they're done during chopping fruit, over a chopping board in the kitchen. That's where a lot of that stuff happens.
But we also talk about the diverse skills and knowledge being a challenge, but they're also a good thing. Staff having different views and opinions, that's the point of reflecting. So whilst it's a challenge, it's also good that they have those diverse skills.
And then bring those rich conversations.
Yeah, that's right. Something or look at it from an angle that those that have more knowledge might not look at it from.
We're a big advocate for promoting children's agency. We really value and respect children's points of view on everything. So we consult with them about a number of things, but we also like to include them on things such as interviewing for new staff. When we have an interview panel, we'll invite children. Of course, we speak to their families and get the okay, and it's a really nice story. They'll go home over dinner at the dinner table and come up with some questions that they can ask the potential new educators, and the questions are fascinating. They're not things that we would ever dare ask, but they're just so genuine, and you get a real sense of when you're interviewing new educators what they're like at interacting with children, and also what their values and beliefs are about children, whether they have that high sense of belief about promoting children's agency too. So that's one example we have about that.
I guess we touched on it earlier, but just giving children that choice and control over where they play, what area that may be. Also when it comes to snack times and things like that, we don't call a halt to everything that's happening and get everyone back. Children have that freedom we'll announce that snack is out, and they have that freedom to come back whenever they choose and grab that. It's another example of choice.
Yeah, for us, it was important to create a link with the school about how children learn and how we capture their learning. So because Concordia is an IB school, a lot of their, or all of their curriculum is inquiry-based learning. So for us to have an emergent curriculum, it really captures that inquiry-based learning and letting sort of children create their own pathway and direct their own pathway, and that educators are really facilitators of that, not necessarily just there to provide learning opportunities and tell them where they're going to learn, how they're going to learn, which room they're going to learn in, but allow children to lead that.
And how do you set up play for the children while still maintaining your routines?
Yeah, well, our routines are based on fairly open activities. So we have a balance of providing physical activity, providing a small amount of technology time. We also have, which ties in with our curriculum, what we call responsibility time. So if it truly is the children's OSH, well, not only are they there to play and engage and form relationships with other kids, but they've also got to have some responsibility and respect for all the stuff that they have and all their resources and all their areas. So we have responsibility time as well, where the children, water their own plants and feed their own fish and clean up their own mess. And like you mentioned, Emma, we provide environments, a year 2 and under room and a year 4 and above room, and we take that privilege away from those children if they're not respectful and responsible in looking after it. So yeah, our routine allows for that flexibility in those times.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that should something come up, like bad weather or rain, or the school want to use one of our areas for something, I think we're flexible enough within our curriculum and routine to change that and move that without creating a lot of anxiety for the kids.
We run very similarly in that aspect in terms of play spaces and environments and stuff like that, and giving the children the choice. So when we talk about having one thing that is physical, it may be to the children, would you like the hall, the green playground, the white playground? So it's not us saying, today's the hall is open from 3 till 4:30, and if at 4 o'clock there's not much interest in the hall anymore, we might move everybody to the green playground if that's where everyone wants to go.
Yeah, and you have different children each night, and they have different interests. So, you might get a group of really sporty, boys or girls that they just want to play a lot of soccer, or you have some other kids that might want to do art and craft. We certainly do offer those more structured play events, like we have a construction club and a coding club. We had a fitness club, a dance club. All of those things have happened, but the children have to lead that. The children have to say and indicate that that's something they want to do. Just putting a construction club for the sake of having a construction club, if you've got no kids, it's not going to work, is it?
Okay, so my 3 key messages for services would be, number 1, relationships are the most important thing. You should always be working towards building relationships with children, with educators, with families, and if you're doing something that is detracting from relationships, then you should reflect back and have a look on what you're doing and maybe change that. Second one is reflection and reflective practice. Get out, look at other services. It's the best thing you can do, is to realise that it's not just what we've done is what we've always done. Let's go see what other people are doing, why they're doing it, bring it back and reflect. So that's that reflective practice. Or if that's difficult, look, do some professional reading. And the third one is articulation. I would recommend, to help you understand what you're doing and to help promote what you're doing, is to practice articulating what you're doing around Area 1, what your program is, how you're documenting. Talk to other educators, invite someone in from another service and talk them through how you do it. And then, because I think a lot of the things we do, we're just doing it every day and it's part of us, and you don't realise till you have to go to explain it to somebody else how important it is to be able to articulate that. So I think it's good at practicing articulating that, and it helps you when you're getting assessed as well.
Yeah, so my 2 key messages, like Mandy said, I have to copy, is relationships. So for us, when we're talking about that sense of belonging, when I think about when I belong, people know my name. I'm greeted when I walk in the door. I'm farewelled when I leave. You know my caregiver's name. You know a bit about me and my background. Adam mentioned it before too. But my second message is it's not one size fits all. There's obviously Adam's was quite different to Mandy and I, but it's just you have to get out there, do the reading, trial and error, try different things. You can quickly see what doesn't work.
Yeah, agree with both of those, but my 2 key messages would be, 1, be prepared to take a risk. Try new things. Not everything you do is going to work, but I don't think assessors are coming out to see perfection, and I don't think you should expect perfection in your service. I think just continue to improve, continue to learn from your mistakes and learn from what you do really well. And the second one would be invest time into your staff. I think staff are a key resource at your service. I know we have trouble keeping them. I think the service and the sector could do better retaining those staff by investing in them, perhaps financially and with your time. So they would be my 2 key messages.
Thanks to all our guests today. We hope you found the information in this webinar really useful. If you have any questions, you're welcome to call the Education Standards Board and speak with an authorised officer. Our email address and phone number can be found on our website.